what I guess I'm getting at is that the half-orc, no matter what, is clearly treated in setting as a minority figure and somewhat dodgy for some reason, as compared to, for example, a dwarf.
Yeah.
If you had a player character use a racist term toward a dwarf, in my opinion, just speaking very generally about the play culture, if you had a player character say something racist about a dwarf, everybody would look at them and say, what have you got against dwarves? Are you some kind of bigot? Whereas
unless you were playing...
Unless you were now.
Yeah,
right.
That's what I'm going to say.
Exactly. So you could do that between the two of them, but the humans in particular would be like, would you two just get over it? Would you Brits and French quit pissing at each other? Get together with us Americans and, And so then you have the notion, though, that if some character in the setting spoke in a bigoted way toward the half-orc, it's not maybe that my guy would like it. Maybe I'd stand up for my half-orc buddy, but it also wouldn't be weird that the guy said it. That's what I'm trying to get at. The idea that they are marginalized in some way, even in their more positive depiction. There's all this kind of thing like, well, half-orc people are learning to get along with the half-orcs. There's kind of this ambiguous phrasing about how well they fit in. A lot of stuff like what I talked about in Aeroflight, that with their orc characters, that they do very well as, small shopkeepers, athletes, and soldiers. They're learning, that kind of phrasing toward them.
Yeah.
And the notion that you see, in that game, they're orcs, but in other games, it's the half-orcs who play that role. So, anyway, the hybrid issue, the half-orc is just the one that has this trajectory all the way through, role-playing. And so it's really interesting to watch their... it's like if we did a stop motion of like all the depictions and watch their sizes change and their colors change and their faces change and all that as we went along. But what other games where we're not talking about orcs nominally do we have these half-race characters, and what does that mean for them in the setting in terms of how they're treated, and then how that rebounds into interesting player options? That's what I'm interested in now.
Yeah, well, you can compare and contrast the contemporary half-orc and half-elf.
Right.
Where, there's really not much stigma with the half-elves.
In fact, in 4th edition, the half-elves often have very contemporary names like Bob and Bill and Jane and stuff, and are very clearly... The humans are like in-setting fantasy humans. The half-elf is basically how you put in your avatar.
Yeah, and if we're being Tolkien-esque, the half-elves are incredibly rare, legendary.
Right.
There's 4 of them in history, kind of thing.
Right.
Whereas you're swarming with half-orcs.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
It's a weird juxtaposition in
half-elves in gaming really, I think, very quickly became the more accessible rather than the less accessible.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly. And then by the time you get to the point I'm talking about, which is quite recent, where the half-elves are grossly, obviously modern humans, as opposed to the full, quote, real fantasy-esque humans. And so, there's that. I think that's what's really going on with the half-elves, and that it's pretty easy to see. I can't think of any fantasy game, like all the Heartbreakers and stuff, which I'm always referencing for this. I can't think of anyone for whom the half-elves are anything but you get a couple of cool elf things, but the character is extremely accessible. You can play the character very intuitively, and they tend to be they get along. The point being is that they get along with the elves. They get along with the humans. They are basically decent Joes and Janes in fantasy, in fantasy role playing. That's and so
though the in Dragonlance, one of the main characters there is Tan is half elven, who's one of the from the books, one of the guys. And well, if you want to, you can play him in the modules as well.
Of course, you can.
Because we tried it for a while, playing with the Canaan characters, which was fun, but was sort of, why are we playing these guys and not? Well, no, that's another discussion.
Right.
But he was clearly between the world of the elves and the humans, and was not quite a human and quite an elf. But that mostly came as well because he was written that way.
Sure. And I think that is a very appealing, though, considering the number of role playing. Well, in science fantasy and fantasy, the transplanted Earthman is extremely common. First of all, and then second, you also have that weird genre of fantasy that kicked in hard by the early '80s, where the gamers suddenly found themselves in the fantasy world. Which was also extremely common. And I'm not necessarily saying that the half-elves... Well, maybe I am saying that the half-elves were already kind of a way to do that if you didn't want to do it literally. And I may be taking that too far at the moment, but if the half-elves go anywhere in terms of content, and the fact that basically nobody hates a half-elf. They're not picked on. They're the hybrid that's not considered a mongrel.
Interesting exception is Dark Sun.
Dark Sun's an exception. It turns all of them on their head on purpose, though.
Yeah,
because you got your cannibal halflings in the desert, right?
Yeah, you can make a strong case that the half elf in Dark Sun is the half orc.
I completely think that's the case. I mean, it's very clear that the halflings. Just you have the desert nomad elves, right? And they're real barbaric, I think. And so I think Dark Sun goes and takes these, and the very fact that the flip is so complete doesn't change any of the content we're talking about. It just shifts around the names for the fun of it. So we got our half elves and our half orcs, and that's great. I think I've bored you guys before with my anecdote about the 3rd edition game that I ran, in which we had a half elf and a half orc who were half brothers.
Yeah, I remember the story.
Who were very, very enjoyable characters. They had the same mom, and so made for a very rich and enjoyable, relationship with them. Yeah. Then you have then if we go to some other games, so, Herman, what did you have in mind about Werewolf?
Well, Werewolf, I was sort of looking like Werewolf has the metis, you have the full werewolf. And you have the humans, but werewolves can't breed with werewolves because they get the mules, the metis, the outcast ones, which are, if I remember well, they can't reproduce, and they're sort of like outcasts of the setting, if I remember it right.
Wow, so you're playing in a White Wolf game where everybody's an outsider, and now you really want to play the outsider.
You're the outsider of the outsider,
right. So now that's kind of interesting in terms of the reproductive issue. No pun intended. The question, first of all, it is not that common in role-playing unless it's baked in, like in Pendragon, to have kids and have your family life be a thing. It's either baked in hard, through the mechanics and procedures of play, or it tends not to be all that important in the assumptions of play as indicated by the text. So the question of whether being an infertile character would matter to anybody. I mean, I'm going to play my other werewolf, and it's not like I was going to play anything about having kids, so who cares?
Yeah, but it's also the of course the angsty bit with werewolf. Everyone playing werewolves, and you can't have a relationship with the other werewolf whom you fell madly in love with, because you might have kids, and the kids would be outcast. And
Right. Well, certainly the human and werewolf love story thing is a big deal, and I can definitely see. But I was so this is a playable group, is what you're saying. You can play one of these guys.
Yes.
Well, yeah, clearly the outsider of the outsiders is, very much a thing. And so you have a good example of what you might expect. We have the offspring of, if not a forbidden reproductive event, at least one that isn't regarded highly, and it's blamed on the offspring, and then the offspring has to grow up. Being in between.
And I think it's forbidden, or at least frowned down upon very seriously. You're not supposed to get kids if you're both werewolves.